forward now. So Merck's been working on this study in response to the Virginia Literacy Act. We got started back in January of 2025 in response to school divisions commissioning this because everybody's trying to understand how implementation is really working related to the VLA. We had put together a research and policy brief focused on this, including folks who are going to be presenting today were on that research team. And that was just kind of sharing like an overview of what's included in the Virginia Literacy Act. But a lot has already changed since the implementation of that. And what we don't know yet is how are things going. And so that's really what Merck is focusing on over the next couple of years with this project. And today, what we're going to be talking about is the expansion of the VLA into middle schools. Our team put together a great research and policy review that includes peer-reviewed literature, publicly available data, and a summary of relevant policy updates. But we're going to be talking through that, but we're also invited some folks from Virginia Department of Education and from Hanover County Public Schools to share some state and division level perspective. I've said several times, and anytime I've had a chance to work with anybody on this team, that I very much have the least amount of literacy expertise of anybody on this team. So I'm planning on talking as little as possible today. But just excited to have you here, and we're going to get started right now. And just to let you know, I shared a link in the chat to our resource document. This is an important document that includes links to all of the different slides from our presenters today. It also includes links to the report that we're referencing, the Merck report, but also other Merck reports and resources from that literacy study. It also includes a podcast episode from this team to summarize some of the things that we found. In case you don't have enough time to read the report and you have a commute, you can listen to the podcast episode on the way. We also have some breakout discussions that we're going to be doing today, and we'll have some collaborative documents that we're going to be working in. Those are also linked in the resource document. So I want to make sure that you have access to that. And without further ado, let's get started with this. So you have access to these links already in the resource document. But in case you wanted to scan it for a QR code on your phone, the slides and resources are here and the QR code on the left, and the report is here on the right. And for anybody who's watching this YouTube video later on, you can still access these QR codes. They should still be working. They'll also be linked in the episode description. And then here's the four things that we're going to be covering today. First is an overview of the Merck report. So Candace, Joan, and Val are going to be sharing findings from the Merck research and policy review that they did, which is really excellent. We have Jill Nagaris from Virginia Department of Education to share perspective from the state level. We also have some colleagues from Hanover County Public Schools, Jan and Christina, who are here to be able to share about how this actually looks in Hanover County Public Schools. Hanover is one of the Merck school divisions, and then we're going to have some breakout discussions where people are going to have a chance to share and exchange resources and ask and answer questions that they might have related to this. And so now I'm going to throw it over to Val to talk about what the team found.
Hi, everyone. I'm Val Robnold. I'm an associate professor in the School of Education, Department of Teaching and Learning, and I'm the reading program coordinator in our school. And so this project on the expansion, so probably most of you know that the first VLA Act was in 2022, and it focused on K-3, and then it was expanded in 2023 to 4th through 8th grade. Now, most school divisions really implemented like their core reading programs for K-5 in 2024-25 school year, even though 4th and 5th grade wasn't required until this school year. So this year has been the main year for implementation in middle schools in 6th through 8th grade. So Candace, who's a doctoral student in the Curriculum, Culture, and Change track in our PhD program in education, as part of her externship, she took the lead on this great report. So Candace, Joan Rhodes, and myself from VCU. We also had Jan Collins from Hanover County, who you're going to hear from in a little bit about how they've been implementing this in Hanover, and then also Kendall Hunt from Henrico County Public Schools, who's the middle school literacy coordinator. I think that's her exact title, and she was actually on the podcast. So if you want to listen to our podcast, Kendall shared a lot about how they're implementing the VLA in Henrico in the middle schools. And they actually started in the 2024-25 school year to get a head start on their middle school implementation. And so that's kind of a little bit of an overview. And so the team, the five of us, kind of took different parts of the report. And so Jan and I worked on the trend data, the NAEP scores, the reading SOL scores, And then Joan and Kendall worked on the policy analysis part, and then Candace was the main person who worked on the literature review. And so I'm going to share some of the trend data and that the trends in middle schools in Virginia prior to the VLA and then after the VLA, or prior to the pandemic and then after the pandemic is really what it boils down to. And so here are the NAEP scores in the US and Virginia. And you can see that in 2019, the Virginia scores and the US scores were very similar. And in also in 2022, right after the pandemic, but then 2024, we had our scores went down by 4 points versus the United States. Across the US was 2 points. And so there was a report on nationwide academic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic through 2024 showed that Virginia ranked low in terms of reading recovery. And Virginia is the 41st among 50 states in terms of reading recovery between 2019 and 2024. And so then for the SOL pass rates, you can see that we have, so we didn't, so in this report, we combined all the MERC districts SOL data, the passing percentage plus recovery. And one thing, you can see that the MERC region's SOL average data scores dropped 2.2 points from the pre-pandemic 2019 scores to 2024, which was not as much as the state had dropped. But one thing that was really shocking to me, because I actually went through every school division and every middle school and every school division in the MERC region, and with overall the score, it was pretty, to me it was just pretty shocking seeing the changes in the scores from 2019 to 2024 when looking at it across the each school division and but all together. So you can see what the average was for all the MERC districts together, but even individually it was pretty a remarkable change of those scores. I think we're going to pass it on to Joan.
Hello, everybody. I'm Joan Rhodes. I'm an associate professor at VCU, and I coordinate early childhood and elementary, and have been very interested in middle school literacy since I taught middle school. You can turn. So, Virginia has really taken a lead in the nation, and historically, around the 1980s is when adolescent literacy came to the forefront. But the progress that was made at that time kind of fizzled out as states looked more towards improving early literacy. So recently, Virginia became the first state to require evidence-based instruction at the middle school, and we are the leader in the nation related to this, even though New Mexico gets a little shout out because they had a summer program that sort of addressed this. So what happened was in 2023, you can click it, David. In 2023, there was an amendment made to the law, to the original legislation, that expanded what we were working on as far as literacy up to 8th grade. So the state delegates were very influenced by the 2022 JLARC report, which sort of was the impetus for them writing the amendment and looking into adolescent literacy. In that report, and as Val mentioned, we had a lower recovery rate, but I think the real scary statistic that came out of that 22 report as far as middle school goes is that 8th graders only had 31% of them as proficient or above in literacy in 2022. And Virginia moved from 7th in the nation to the 34th in the nation. So that really brought that to the forefront and was definitely an impetus. Go ahead. So what's been interesting is while Virginia moved forward with this and is sort of a leader, we were immediately followed by Indiana, who is working alongside us in some ways. But since that time, Excel in Ed, a nonprofit educational policy organization, has encouraged other states across the country to use a template that they've created to impact their adolescent literacy programs. And what that template asks for is diagnostic screening, intervention and remediation programs, professional training in the science of reading approaches, and then transparent communication with families. So these changes have significant impact on middle schools and implications, and we all know that this is beginning this academic year. So one of the things that we've done in Virginia is we've adopted supplemental and intervention literacy programs from an approved list that our state reviewed programs and has offered those. Also, the VALS has been expanded to be able to screen students who show difficulty in reading deficiencies. So students take the VALS if they have low SOL scores. And if they have, go ahead. And if they have low SOL scores and low VALS scores, they are eligible for a reading plan, and schools must create a plan for students who show these deficiencies. And so students who have a reading plan are given targeted intervention, and that intervention can take multiple forms. It can be tutoring, small group, before and after school. It really is up to the school system to make the decision about how they want to address students who have deficiencies in literacy development. Also, as part of this expansion, middle school educators are provided with professional development on evidence-based instruction. And finally, schools are expected to meet the staffing requirements and have appropriate levels of literacy instruction personnel to address the challenges faced by the children. So
Okay.
I'm going to turn this over to Candace.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Candace Bechtold, and I am a graduate student through VCU's Curriculum, Culture, and Change PhD program. I'll plug that program. It is a wonderful program. It has taught me so many things. If anyone is thinking about pulling the trigger on looking into it, I highly suggest it. It's been a life-changing experience for me. And another plug, working on projects with Merck has just been such a fruitful and wonderful experience. I advise anybody who gets those emails, if you've ever thought to yourself, oh, I don't know, that seems like I kind of want to work on a project. Either maybe, you've always been on the receiving end of getting the information. I highly suggest diving in and joining a project because it is such a wonderful learning experience. Okay, so I am going to share what research says about literacy intervention specifically at the middle school level. So the methodology that we used, myself and my other co-authors, for this section is like a rigorous literature review methodology. And what that means is we looked at what other people who are researchers, other researchers and other scientists have written about this topic in the field of education, in the field of literacy instruction. And so we took two published peer-reviewed pieces of rigorous research, and we read what others have found to be successful structurings of intervention, specifically at the middle school level. And so my co-authors have shared this policy had an impetus. It looked at data trends, and then it incorporated a lot of policy pieces. And so what you all as stakeholders might be wondering is how do we put some of these components into practice? And when the policy is saying things like literacy diagnostic screener and supplemental intervention and core program versus intervention program. What we wanted to do is go to people who have researched these things and bring you information that shows that there's a lot written about effective passages and somewhat ineffective passages, and so we want to share some of those findings today. The first thing that I want to highlight is that the VLA policy specifically states that your middle school intervention is supposed to supplement your already existing tiered system of supports. In Virginia, it's called the VTSS, or the Virginia Tiered System of Support, and it's a part of MTSS, the Multi-Tiered System of Support. So on the screen here, you'll see the pyramid that explains tiered instruction, and this information might be you already know. It might not be new to you because the MTSS tiered structure is something that's been happening in Virginia schools for a while. But what I want to highlight is how the VLA sort of impacts this structure. So just briefly going through it, the bottom tier, the number one, tiered one instruction is the support that students receive in literacy from their core general ed teachers. And you can see it says core instruction and supports. So through tiered instruction, the general ed teacher and all content teachers that the student sees. We're talking English teachers, math, science, and social studies teachers. They all have to offer students supports through differentiated instruction and scaffolding to meet students' reading difficulties. However, when students need that extra level of support, they get what's called Tier 2 support, which is an added layer of support. And what this arrow here is trying to indicate is that through the VLA policy, when the policy mandates that middle schools adopt a program to support and supplement that Tier 2 instruction, this does not replace or sort of absolve Tier 1 support. And so it's important that teachers and stakeholders understand that the policy is trying to bolster the intervention that students are receiving in Tier 2, and Tier 3, because Tier 3 is another layer of support, it's just more intensive. But what the policy is not trying to do is replace the support that students are supposed to get from their general education classroom teachers and from content teachers. So that's really important to highlight. The next thing that we're going to look at is we looked at literature very specific to that second tier. So again, the VLA policy, what Joan just shared, those components of the policy, it discusses Tier 2 intervention at the middle school level. And what that means is the support that students are receiving outside of the classroom. And so we looked at what the literature says. When researchers and scientists in the fields of education, when they're looking at Tier 2 intervention, what's been written, what did they find, recent publications on this? And what we found when we were reading pieces is that middle school intervention should be structured not like elementary intervention. That was one of the biggest pieces we found. I'm sure some of you on this call today, you have experience with intervention at the elementary level. And what we found in research is that it's very important to highlight in that intervention at the middle school level is sort of a different beast because of very unique challenges. And so you see here, it says middle school intervention should be structured to fit those very unique challenges that are unique to middle school and to middle school learners because one, there's an increased text complexity and an increased use of multisyllabic words in middle school. That's different than elementary school. So the intervention should be structured to meet that challenge of at the secondary level. Two, research found that middle school teachers often struggle to see themselves take on that role as an interventionist. Middle school teachers, and again, we're looking at quantitative survey data that has shown when asked, middle school and secondary level teachers struggle to see themselves as able or capable of offering students intervention support because they don't see themselves as being in that role. And so perhaps maybe an implication we hope out of this policy is that they begin to see themselves in this role. And then lastly, middle school has that unique challenge, I'm sure you've all have seen too, of scheduling. It's very different than the elementary level. So research has shown that when asked about middle school intervention, teachers and administrators often come back with, it's difficult to fit it in scheduling. Second, we found the research shows is that middle school at that intervention at the middle school level needs to support the very specific developmental needs of an adolescent learner. There are students that are receiving literacy intervention at this level that it could be very similar to what they would receive in elementary school, but what research has shown is that an interventionist, a teacher who is giving intervention to an adolescent, needs to be aware of the developmental needs of that child who is not at the elementary school level. A big thing to highlight is that adolescent students need to have instruction be highly relevant to them. And so when you're discussing phonemic awareness or a phonics concept to them, to structure it in a way that speaks to them as an adolescent, not as a younger elementary student, speaking to them, teaching them in a relevant way that is specifically which phonics skills they need instead of sort of an overview of phonics. Because what research has found in the first bullet point here is that intervention at that secondary level often fails to consider that adolescents have their own personal agency and an already highly developed individual identity as a reader. Those two key points are crucial for adolescents. One, when you are approaching an adolescent for intervention, it's very important to consider that student is not an elementary school student to where they need sort of to be guided in a way, but an adolescent has a lot of their own agency. And so when you're structuring intervention, you're giving these adolescent students opportunities to make their own choices in the structuring of the intervention and maybe the way that the lesson's going, because again, they're not an elementary school student. But then also they have an identity already. So incorporating that into the intervention where you're asking them, how do you see yourself as a reader? How do you see this intervention going? Giving them that autonomy and that agency in the intervention has been shown through research to be highly effective. And then the second point here is that research has also shown that using a diagnostic screener is very crucial and very important. I know that there's a lot of discussion about using the VALS literacy screener at the middle school level because it's a new terrain for a lot of teachers, and I'm sure we're all feeling that. But what research shows is that it's really important to understand exactly what the students need at that adolescent age group, because if the instruction is not relevant to them, so if, for example, if they're receiving phonics instruction, but they don't need phonics instruction, they can really have a loss of motivation, and it can be an ineffective approach. So that diagnostic screener is in place to help really individualize the instruction for exactly what they need. And then next, what the VLA has given is districts, and you all, I'm sure, are aware of this. Districts have been left with their own autonomy in choosing how you're going to structure your intervention. And so we looked at what the research says about structuring intervention. The VLA gives multiple different modalities, and the research also shows that there is a variety of modalities for how intervention can be structured. One, the most common approach is scheduling it as a remedial class. To where students take 2 English level classes. One is their grade level course, and then the second course that they take, that's a whole class, is considered their intervention class. And typically that class replaces an elective. So that's just one modality for how intervention can be structured. Policy documentation also shows that schools may not adopt that approach, or divisions, that they may adopt a more tutoring style approach to where tutoring happens during school, before school, or after school. And then third, the other approach has been some kind of whole school initiative that can occur, usually like in an after school program that sort of checks that box of intervention. And so VLA gives school districts freedom and flexibility. And this might be somewhere where school divisions are still trying to figure out what works best for their school. And so, what does research say? So, when we looked at specifically what has already been written about these three different types of modalities, is that we found research has shown that the most common approach is that remedial class that replaces the elective. But what's been shown is that there's inconsistent evidence of support for that strategy. So then, therefore, we looked at, well, what has been proven to show effective approaches for reading intervention? And what we found is there's two research-based structuring approaches that have demonstrated a highly positive impact on student reading, specifically at the middle school level. And you can see on the screen it says small group tutoring and collaborative learning. However, I want to make a point that it's small group tutoring has the research did have that in a variety of modalities. And so there were research showing small group tutoring worked well in an after school program, or small group tutoring during an intervention class, or small group tutoring, before school structuring. So it was used in multiple different modalities, but small group tutoring was the thing that was used the most. It showed that it hit all of those developmental needs of adolescents. When you structure intervention in small groups, if it's in an intervention class, if the students are grouped in groups and the instruction is being given to them in small groups, but not just, another dose of whole group instruction, that's been shown to be highly effective for middle school learners because one, it can be relevant to them. Their small group is working on skills that is very specific to what they showed on the diagnostic screener and what they have on that reading plan, instead of sort of just giving a second dose to all students, because once an adolescent does feel, oh, this intervention is not relevant to me. She's talking about phonics, and I already know about phonics. You see a drop in motivation with these learners, and so that small group approach does help with that. But then two, also the second research-based approach is collaborative learning, which means any form of collaboration, because students at this developmental adolescent stage thrive off of peer interaction and group work. And so when they get opportunities to work on a project that is based on remediation of literacy skills, or intervention, going back into, pass grade work. But when they're working on an activity through collaboration with their peers, it has shown to be highly motivating for this age group and to be a very effective practice. And so the third question that we asked is then, what does research say about instructional strategies specific to the middle school level? These 4 points were pulled from a white paper from the What Works Clearinghouse. And so what the VLA policy brings in is programs, supplemental, and intervention. An intervention program, this is defined in the brief, so I would refer back to the brief to look for the specific definitions, but an intervention program is like an all-encompassing program that offers intervention through these different approaches, but a supplemental program is, what it says, supplementing a program that you already have. If you feel that your program is sort of missing one of the aspects, it can be supplemented. So the reality is that your district already has a program, but I do want to go over what the What Works Clearinghouse says, because maybe it could be important for you to sort of see these 4 strategies, and you can sort of ask yourself, do we see these in our intervention program? So one, because of that unique challenges to middle school, all intervention for literacy at the middle school level needs to be teaching multisyllabic word decoding. So decoding words and phonics, they still need that teaching of blends and short vowels and long vowels, but through multisyllabic words, because that's what middle school students see often in their text. Two, fluency building. Another reminder that compartmentalizing teaching literacy skills is important, but they need to be kind of all grouped back together, and students need to be reading independently on their own fluently to incorporate all of the different skills that they're learning and using to be a fluent reader at that middle school level. Three, comprehension building strategies, and the What Works Clearinghouse paper, which is summarized in the brief, gets into research proven comprehension strategies and what is also not research proven comprehension strategies. And then lastly, four, sense making strategies. And I really enjoyed reading that one of the What Works Clearinghouse. Sense making is as far as, okay, so we've taught these students decoding. They know how to decode multisyllabic words. They know how to do individual comprehension skills, and they're reading fluently. But that fourth bubble says, are they making any sense of it? Are they able to like actually then draw conclusions or make inferences? So that's sort of that holistic big picture of reading. Are they putting all of the skills that they're learning to actually make sense of what they learned?
All right. Thanks, Candace, for that excellent description of the literature review. I'm going to start talking about the takeaways and recommendations that we have from our brief. And so, Dave, you want to go to the first one? So the first one is, so because we're the first state that actually has passed this kind of legislation, we're going to be leading the nation, or we are leading the nation in expanding literacy legislation to the middle school. And so a lot of states around the country are going to look to us, look to Virginia, about how we have navigated this terrain of having focusing on literacy in the middle school and this using evidence-based practices, and so we have to be aware, ready for that. And I think the work that we've done here with the middle school brief and doing the podcast and the seminar is one way that we're really helping other states as they start to work on this type of legislation and then implementation in their schools in their states. The next is how important professional learning is going to be for all teachers. I think that's one thing that has to be said, and in the podcast, Kendall talked about it really well, about all teachers being teachers of reading, having the content, not just the English teachers, but also the content teachers, and how we need to make sure that all the middle school teachers, not just English, but also the content teachers, are getting that the very highly effective professional learning that's job embedded, to understand and to implement evidence-based literacy instruction and intervention. And so it's just a continual process. It can't be, a one day set of sessions that they go to. And I think a lot of school divisions have started using literacy coaches and instructional coaches in the middle school to help teachers and to provide that support they need as they're implementing this instruction in their classrooms.
So, fellow interventionists, I know that sometimes we might feel like we're a little siloed and separated, but one of the takeaways from the review of literature and the research is that we really need to work more integrated with core Tier 1 educators and literacy leaders within a school. So we want to try and encourage cross-planning, where we're especially for students who are on a reading plan, so that they have cohesion in the intervention that they receive, and that it mirrors and is supported in the classroom as well. Our fourth takeaway emphasized the benefit of small group tutoring approaches. And so it's very helpful if you're doing a class where you have a remediation class that's in place of an elective or something like that, that even though you may have a whole class of students, that you're working to provide opportunities for students to work in small groups. And as administrators who might be in the session, any way that you can reduce the class size for intervention groups enhances student outcomes.
Mm. And then the fifth final takeaway of our report is that we sort of made this inference that the policy has tied student data to their intervention supports, and this has a big potential to actually increase student motivation. It's been difficult to get middle schools to be motivated on those end of the year assessments and assessments that come throughout the year, but through the VLA policy is sort of a catalyst of events that if they don't do well on that SOL test, then they get vetted to take the VALS screener, and they get an individual reading plan, and in certain cases that reading plan meeting has to involve their parents, and they get put in a remedial course for if that's what the modality is. And there's a cascade of events that happens, and so sort of an implication of this could very well be that students are motivated, highly motivated to perform on that reading SOL, sort of to keep their elective class.
Right. Thank you, Candace, Val, and Joan, for that overview. And this is, again, it's a quick overview of really rich information that's provided in that report that's linked in the resource documents. So I would just encourage you to take a look at that and to share it with anybody in your networks who might benefit from the research. But we're going to shift gears here, and I'm going to hand it over to our colleague Jill Nogueras over at the VDOE to provide the state perspective.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Knapp. If you can just let me know if my screen is sharing. Anybody
It
can do a
is.
thumbs up. Fantastic.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Jill Nogueras, and I serve as the Associate Director of K-12 English and Literacy here at the Virginia Department of Education. I see many familiar faces and names here this afternoon, so thanks for sticking around, especially after 4 o'clock, to connect with all of us on this very important topic. I will say that while I only have about 10 minutes to speak, I did include 35 slides worth of information, more so because I wanted to make sure that you had the links, the language, and the takeaways so that you can bring these back to your school divisions. So don't be surprised if I dance over a couple of slides during this 10 minutes, because these are here just for your knowledge and your future use. So just kind of wanted to give you a little bit of background. Obviously, the Commonwealth of Virginia has some very specific priorities here to support students as they're kind of moving through their K-12 experience. And a lot of the work of the English program aligns with priority 1, which is to set and help every learner meet high expectations. And that is where you're going to find that connection with the Virginia Literacy Act. I do want to give a quick breakdown and overview of the Virginia Literacy Act, which, while is a very cool title and really fun to say and really helpful for people to kind of understand where we are, it actually has moved into many different parts of codified language in the Code of Virginia. So it does not live anywhere as the Virginia Literacy Act itself. It was communicated that way as the proposed legislation, and it supports all of the work that is happening for the K-12 experience of students here in Virginia, but it touches so many different components of instruction and teacher licensure and professional development and professional learning and intervention and student support that it's kind of spread its wings all over the Code of Virginia. But just to make sure to level set here for everyone, the key components of the Virginia Literacy Act include defining key terms. So we now have codified language around evidence-based literacy instruction and science-based reading research. So there is a specific definition that all Virginians are to follow when considering that work. It also aligns everything that we have been working on in school divisions for our core curriculum, our screening, and our intervention methods. So that is, instead of throwing spaghetti at the wall, we are taking an evidence-based approach to make sure that the pieces we are using to support students work together. So it requires that core K-5, that core program for core literacy instruction, and then a board-approved list for supplemental and intervention programs in kindergarten through 8th grade. And these have to align with the science-based reading research. And these are also articulated in the division-wide literacy plan. We do have a statewide screener to identify students who need this intervention. We had the K3 kind of rolled out last year, and the updated K3 rolled out last year. And then we have the 4th through 8th kind of and moving forward in the 25-26 year. It also adds some SOQ funding so that we can have a division-wide staffing ratio of 1 reading specialist for 550 students in K5. So that's that 4-5 part of VLA 4 through 8, and then funding for 1 reading specialist per 1,100 students in grades 6 through 8. And that is where you all are interested in hearing more today. It also requires that continued professional development and training. If you were to read the Code of Virginia, you would see many, 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 many licenses identified as needing and requiring to receive evidence-based literacy instruction training. And this extends even to principals, as we talked about earlier, content area teachers, elementary teachers, special educators, reading specialists, you name it. And this is provided by our statewide partner at Virginia Literacy Partnerships out of UVA. So all of this training is available via Canvas, and school divisions have the opportunity to add additional teachers and new teachers each year to this mandatory training. But there are multiple Canvas opportunities based on your license and the level of training that is required for you to have that support so that you can support students in your school division. The VLA also requires that schools partner with families. It is a requirement that all parents are offered the opportunity to be part of the development of their student's reading plan if the student is identified for needing a reading plan. It also requires that we provide resources to support literacy development at home, and we have many resources posted on the Virginia Department of Education site, and there's a family resource hub on the VLP site as well. And then the last piece is really looking at educator preparation and licensure. So a lot of that is working together to make sure that our upcoming and new teachers have that training in evidence-based literacy instruction, that they learn about the science of reading, that they demonstrate mastery of understanding these materials, and that our literacy assessment for licensure aligns with all of that. So this just kind of outlines and walks you through that. Additionally, the last piece is the addition of a micro-credential program for earning an add-on reading specialist endorsement to kind of help with those additional SOQ-funded reading specialist positions. So very briefly, I just want to say, because while we are in our first year of implementing in the middle school, your K-5 counterparts have done a phenomenal job of rolling out VLA. And I think it's something we can all take some of their successes and reflect on, and also think about how we might incorporate some of their successes and what's working as we think about what we need to do in middle school, and also how we might tweak or modify what they're doing. So in this past year, as the first year of implementation, K-5 literacy classrooms all provided core literacy instruction using their HQIM that was from the approved list. And that was every student in grades kindergarten through grade 5. And then any students who needed supplemental and intervention literacy instruction also received supplemental and intervention from board-approved materials on those lists. Every school division has now submitted multiple division-wide literacy plans. They initially submitted them in the summer of 2024. They updated and revised in December of 2024, and then switched over to submitting a biennial division literacy plan on June 30th. So if you have not seen what is in your school division's division literacy plan, they are all posted on school division websites, but they are also on the VDOE webpage as well. So if you have the resource and click on that link, you'll be able to access that too. We made sure that teachers, we had thousands and thousands and thousands of teachers participate in training on evidence-based literacy instruction. Our reading specialists coordinated and oversaw interventions for students not meeting literacy benchmarks. And on top of that, K-12, everyone fully implemented the new updated 2024 English Standards of Learning, including assessing that learning through the spring 2025 SOL assessments in grades 3 through end of course. So a lot has happened in the field of literacy in the last couple of years. So these next few slides, just as we move into 4th through 8, I do want to highlight that we have many supplemental intervention programs available, and it is important to note at the October 23rd, 2025 Board of Education meeting, another round of supplemental and intervention materials were approved to expand the programming available in grades 6 through 8. So if you have not looked at these updated guides, I absolutely would encourage you to do that, especially as you're thinking through the needs of your students and where you might have gaps in understanding, whether that's from your core programming or you need an intervention, you have a few students who need an intervention in X and you are looking for something updated. Please check out the updated guides. Again, those are just posted on the website. And I do want to also remind everyone that while division literacy plans only need to be updated biennially, you are able to change and update resources and change your division literacy plan as early and often as you'd like to. So please just know that we just need access to your most current division literacy plan. But if you see something new on the list that you want to look into and think about for the next school year, I know everybody's kind of thinking about their budgets. Now is the time to look at those supplemental and intervention materials for middle school. Excuse me. All right, and just making sure that everybody sees, we have expanded those reading specialists through 8th grade, and that is a really important step here in Virginia to have that support. So making sure everybody understands that those reading specialists work with the classroom teacher to help develop, oversee, and monitor student progress on those student reading plans. If you are curious about your division's specific funding, you can use the division calc tool here to kind of pull it, and then it'll open in an Excel document. You can select your school division and you can determine how many SOQ funded reading specialists should be available for you in your school division. So just keep in mind that is where that information is found. And then in this section, I really just have information about FAQs, which I think will be helpful more so as you're kind of thinking through and moving forward. So I'm not going to read each and every single one to you. These are here for your knowledge, but it is important to know this is one of the most commonly asked questions we get was, do all middle school reading specialists need to be certified reading specialists to oversee student reading plans? And so for this group, it is important to know the school divisions may employ reading specialists or educators who have successfully completed the reading specialist micro-credential course and received that add-on endorsement. Now, please know that that add-on endorsement is provisional for a period of 5 years and does not replace or contribute to a reading specialist degree or certification. So it is a little bit of a stopgap to kind of support, as we definitely need additional reading specialists here in the Commonwealth, but it does provide some training so that you could support on the VLA side of things in the middle school. But it is important to note that it is only provisional and it is only good for 5 years. And then, of course, the other common question that we get is who needs to take the screener? So it's important to know that anybody who scores in the basic or below basic range on their reading SOL assessment will have a student reading plan. That I'm jumping over part of the sentence because that is important. Anyone who scores in the basic or below basic will have a student reading plan. Those students will then also be screened using the VALS 4 through 8 screener to kind of help you develop those student reading plans. All right. Additional students may be administered the VALS 4 through 8 based on parent request. If a teacher has a lot of concerns and really wants to look into additional students who might need support, maybe if they are new to your school division, maybe if they are new to the state, there are expanded ways that you could screen additional students, but that is just giving the requirement. All right, so just going to keep going because that kind of handles all of that. But thinking about that intervention, because that is what this group is here for, thinking about scheduling intervention. Local school divisions have control to figure out how schools will meet that additional instruction time. All right. There is a time requirement when we're talking about K-3, but as we move into that 4 through 8 space, school divisions really have to think about master schedules, staffing, resources that you have available, and individual student needs. This outlines the codified language in terms of what flexibility is allowed and what opportunities you have. So that instruction for that intervention could come from a reading specialist, a trained aide, a computer-based reading tutorial program, or a classroom teacher with the support from an aide. You could provide intervention using extended instructional time in the school day or school year, or you could have an additional literacy course outside of the required SOL English course that provides the specific evidence-based literacy instruction identified in the student's reading plan. So there are a variety of options. However, regardless of what path you take, that the intervention materials that are used for that intervention must be selected from the board-approved intervention list. So just kind of keep that in mind. We do have several FAQs here between us and our partners over at UVA in terms of if you have questions about the 4 through 8 VLA implementation or the screener itself. So there are two different resources available. Just wanted to make sure you had them linked there. And then just wanted to leave you with a couple of extra additional supports that we have available as we're thinking about how to make all of this work with core instruction. So just kind of thinking for instructional leaders, what you should be considering as you're thinking about supporting intervention in middle school and what you can do to kind of help this effort. A couple of recommendations. Consider uninterrupted or additional planning time for English teachers who support or teach intervention. Continued support on implementation of interventions used within the division or building. Please engage in that data analysis protocols to continuously monitor student progress for students with an SRP and review master schedules. I know we're getting into master schedule season, so kind of thinking about how your students are doing this year, where you're going next year, what your data is showing, what opportunities do you need to consider. And then, of course, think about flexible small groupings based on student needs to access grade level standards. And then intervention schedules outside of that Tier 1 literacy instruction that are built to focus on student foundational skills to meet grade level standards. We have a variety of resources available to support kind of that grade level work, and then also where you can find in other grade levels how you might support students. So we have progression charts and grade side-by-sides to think about where you might need to go. We're also suggesting that people look at the demands of the text section of the instructional guides that are all posted to think about supporting that grade level learning and scaffolding that instruction up during that time. We also have many resources that are all linked here. I just want to make sure that you can find all of them. So really they're here as links for you to have later. The Understanding the Standards documents will be your best friend. I have highlighted the grades 4 through 8. If you really want to break down and know what a student needs to understand in each of those grade levels to help you determine what supports might be helpful for each of those students. We also have those instructional guides and webinars for those. The progression charts really help you outline what students should know and be able to do in each grade level. And along with, I think at this point we have over 40 webinars posted on our site to support instruction, at least half of them at the middle school level. So this just offers you an idea of some of the fall materials, webinars that we offered so that you can look at those. I highly recommend that you look at the Considerations for Planning Reading Intervention webinar for grades 4 through 8 that was released. And then there are several walkthrough tools that are posted and webinars to kind of align with what you should be looking for in English instruction. Again, just a snapshot of our resources here and how to receive notification about upcoming opportunities, things that are available, whatever's happening here at the department. So while you only saw me today, there is a fabulous team of literacy experts working at the department to support all of you. And I just wanted to make sure that I left you with their contact information as well. So this is how to reach everyone. I won't take up any more time. I'm going to turn it back over, I think, to Dr. Naff to take it away from here.
Thanks, Jill. That's so helpful. And we're going to transition now to share the perspective from one of our school division partners, Hanover County Public Schools. So Jan and Christina, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for having us. I'm going to let you also give me the yes, I'm seeing this. Great. There's a thumbs up. My name is Jan Collins, and I am the ELA Curriculum Specialist for Hanover County Public Schools. And we have been tasked with just giving you kind of an overview of our approach to VLA so far in our 4 through 8 rollout, and hopefully at the end partnering with you to get some of your great ideas too, as we kind of all are on this journey together and side by side one another. And I'd like to give Christina an opportunity to introduce herself really quickly as well.
Hello, everyone. We're excited to be here today. I am Christina Whitfield, the English and Language Arts Coordinator, the other half of Jan, and I've been here in Hanover since last spring.
Great. So we're going to cover 2 topics with you today. One of those is obviously what we've spent the majority of our time talking about so far, and that is our Tier 2 approach to our 4 through 8 VLA implementation. And also afterwards going to really dig in a little bit to our Tier 1 approach, which was kind of a result of both our implementation of our elementary, being very thoughtful about that implementation, along with just the data and what we've been seeing instructionally that begged us to kind of reimagine our Tier 1 approach. Of course, all of this work is based on our HCPS literacy vision that we have posted and included in our plan. We are very hopeful that we can make all students become effective communicators across all disciplines by engaging in a volume of authentic reading, writing, speaking, and listening, rooted in evidence-based literacy instruction. And as part of that, we also have some kind of non-negotiables that we really lean into. That's, of course, our high-quality instructional materials, science of reading research, and we've been using the words evidence-based literacy instruction so much that it just kind of rolls off the tongue now. We also really want our kids reading wide and very complex text. And so we've leaned heavily into that idea of complex text sets. And of course, we want that systematic and explicit instruction with lots of targeted practice for our K2 phonics people, and then also for morphology as we enter grades 3 through 8. And then kind of wrapping it all up is this idea that if students aren't succeeding or have some gaps in those areas, that we are responsible for providing that really targeted intervention for all of our students in grades K through 8.
So as you can see, our literacy vision is really founded in K through 5, and that's where we started 2 years ago. And so we wanted to kind of also share the foundation of what 3 through 5 looks like, because that did support our adjustments and shifts and changes to both Tier 2 and Tier 1 at middle school. We knew that a consistent approach with evidence-based literacy instruction was going to set us up to ensure that those same structures were in place in middle school. So this is just a visual of our third through fifth grade literacy block and where our direct instruction and guided practice is provided, all in foundational skills, vocabulary, reading, and writing. And writing really connected to reading has been really important for us to ensure is happening, ensuring that independent or guided practice is happening in the classroom, and then an opportunity in everyone's master schedule as part of the literacy block to have targeted small group, that it's fluid and flexible based on data. And so having this foundation alongside our HQIM has really helped us determine what it needed to look like in middle school and how we were going to continue to implement the VLA in 6 through 8. And on the next slide, we just wanted to share some reading opportunities our young learners are having here in Hanover, where we want to make sure kids are partner reading, individually reading, presenting their understandings, talking and discussing about their learning and their reading. And so that has really helped us build this foundation as we move into middle school VLA implementation. So thinking about middle school VLA implementation prior to this school year, we really wanted to make sure that we focused in on what the research said, what our new standards say that we need to be teaching, what our current data said of our students moving from elementary into middle school, and then of course what the legislation says as it demands a change in our practice. So here are some kind of priority changes that we made. Obviously implementing the new VALS assessment 4 through 8 this year, allowing an opportunity for targeted intervention based on student rating plans using our approved resources. That was in place this year. Prioritizing literacy support personnel. We had reading specialists and coaches in place in our buildings beginning last year so that we could prepare for this change this year in grades 6 through 8. Making some changes in our Tier 1 instructional approach, and Jan's going to share more with you about that later, and then expanding more access to grade level complex text to kind of match our standards. We wanted to give you a high-level overview of our current rating plan data so you can kind of see where we're coming from in elementary and what we are looking at and facing in middle school. I wanted to really highlight that if you look at our kindergarten and our grade 1 data, we're seeing vast improvements in the need for student rating plans in those grade levels where we know explicit systematic instruction has been happening for the last 2 school years. So we know that our approach and our plan going forward will continue to domino effect into middle school. And you can see there are our percentages of students with reading plans in grades 6 through 8. So we hope to see that domino effect continue to move as we put good Tier 2 intervention in place, as well as reimagining our Tier 1 instruction. Something really important that we wanted to highlight is we've tried to take a closer look at our student rating plans in middle school and what the primary need of those students are based on their data. And so based on the SRPs that we've written in middle school, you can see here that 52% of them had a primary goal in word analysis, which are foundational phonics and word analysis skills that we want to ensure students have as they become stronger middle school readers. 21% of them have a primary goal on their reading plan around fluency. And then 27% of our students have a primary goal in the area of comprehension and vocabulary. And so we know that supports are provided differently for each of those groups of students and different goals that they have, and Tier 1 instruction is really important to that, especially in that area where students have a goal in comprehension and vocabulary. So some of the things that we've worked on this year and will continue to work through in Tier 2 is to really refine how our Tier 2 supports are in place in middle school. We have a course called Project Literacy that uses our approved program and is based upon student data and need. We intentionally group students into those courses or blocks so that they are being provided the support based on diagnostic assessments and in a small group setting within that course. So kind of based upon those same things that Candace mentioned as far as intervention. We have a reading specialist in each middle school, both supporting push-in support and in a pull-out setting. We have been able to set up a really great system of collaboration between our building reading specialist and our literacy coach, supporting both Tier 2 and Tier 1. Continuing to provide professional learning for our reading specialist. And then 2 things we've really been working hard on this year is developing a consistent progress monitoring system. It can often be hard in the middle school setting to ensure progress monitoring is happening regularly, but we want to make sure that that is in place so we know that students are in the right place for the length of time that we've chosen to provide intervention for them. And then that there are proper structures for communication so that guardians and the community understand how we're supporting their students with Tier 2. So our next steps as far as Tier 2 is really figuring out the nuances of how to provide small group push-in support into those courses in English classes based on our progress monitoring and our VALS data, and then continuing to utilize that data, especially in the upcoming testing window at mid-year, so we can really determine what our future course offerings look like so they're a correct instructional match to where our students are. And then, of course, continued professional learning for our literacy leaders so that we can make sure that our Tier 2 is talking to our Tier 1 and our students are performing and able to transfer those skills to be successful in their English classrooms.
So as Christina mentioned before, we looked heavily at the research, obviously, our new standards, our own personal data, and also the legislation, and realized that it was really time for us to do something refining wise in Tier 1 as well. And so these are the things that we leaned into prior to the summer last year to really start thinking about that. One of those is that we really wanted, as I said earlier, kids reading a lot in complex text sets built around a common theme and really dedicated to each of our grade levels. So we purchased those with teacher support early on in the spring of last year and have implemented those this year. We also released a new middle school and a new high school curriculum, and we embedded EBLI into each of those curricula. We, in addition to the required state professional learning, we provided for our middle school teachers 15 hours of required professional learning around new standards, EBLI, and our curriculum over the last 2 summers. We also, as Jill was saying earlier, I think it was Jill, that this, one and done is going to do it. We're going to have to provide that layered professional learning for our teachers. So we do that through their weekly meetings with their teams, something that some of us call a PLT or a PLC meeting. And we are embedding our HCPS new model for instructional design, that backwards design model, into that process, as well as making sure that our teachers, our teacher leaders, such as our English department leaders and also our other content leaders and our administrators that supervise ELA as well as other contents, get that same layered professional learning. And then I think most importantly, actually, is the coaching that our incredible literacy coaches are doing with our teams and our individual teachers to provide that last layer of support so that we're really supporting our teachers, whole group, small group, and then individually as well, because we know that teacher expertise is what's really going to make or break it. This is our reimagining of the middle school literacy block. For each of our whole blocks, we provide a complex grade level text, and students are asked to read like a writer. And then on another whole block day, they're asked to read like a reader the first day and a writer the second day. So they're revisiting that complex grade level text over and over again for a variety of purposes. On the Read Like a Reader days, we provide a before, during, and after routine for students where we're really digging into vocabulary or word application or word study, background knowledge during those befores. They're reading like a reader in the during part, and then they're really writing about reading. We thought that was a perfect marriage. And then on the Read Like a Writer, where they revisit the text again for those writer's craft moves, there's grammar or syntax at the beginning, reading with annotation, reading like a writer, brainstorming and planning. They go through kind of a mini writing process. And by the end of those couple of days, then they're, revising, editing, and sharing their work. In between those, we have a split block, which is a half block day that students will attend. And then they're reading a book of their choice through engaged reading. There's a lot of discussion and writing about the books that they've chosen. And this is an opportunity for us to provide even more targeted small group instruction as well. You can see our students are really engaged in more discussion than they ever have been before. You can see them doing a hassle line, talking about the books that they're reading, involved in group annotation of text right there on the desks and with large paper. So we've seen a lot of engagement growth here as well as instructional growth. So I think anytime you implement something new, along with the teacher learning, you have to continuously go back to see what's happening so that you can kind of re-up your approach, right? There's always going to be speed bumps in any implementation. So we've been walking a lot, and we've been looking at data, and these are kind of our next steps. and hope that you'll kind of join us in brainstorming some of your own next steps as well. We really need to lean in a little more heavily during tier 1 in that word analysis area and not have it always be vocabulary instruction. Because secondary teachers are not quite as comfortable, they sometimes veer towards the vocabulary instruction, and we need to make sure that we're emphasizing the word analysis because our student data shows us that's important. We want to continue to up the game with our complex text sets, continue to make sure that that engaged reading and rereading of a variety of texts is happening to build our fluency. And then finally, using those approaches, those instructional routines that we put in place for reading like a reader and reading like a writer to really get to the comprehension and analysis piece of tier 1. So again, this was just our approach and what we've done. I'm sure that you hopefully are going to share with us some of your really brilliant ideas later. But we are always welcome. We're kind of overly passionate about this work. So we welcome you to come and discuss it with us or call us anytime. We'd love to collaborate with you in any way possible. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, Jane and Christina. And I really meant it when I said I had the least amount of literacy expertise of anybody on this team. So it's really great to hear from everybody. Thanks to all of our presenters. We're going to transition now into some quick breakout rooms. Each of the different presenters are going to lead one of those breakout discussions, and there's some collaborative documents that are in that resource document for us to share. Some resources, questions that you might have. And one of the reasons that we do this is that we recognize there's a lot of collective expertise of the people in this room. It's not just the people that are presenting. So I'm going to open those rooms now. It's 4:45. I'll probably pull us together with about 2 minutes to spare. Feel free to collaborate in that document or just have a conversation about middle school literacy and share resources and ideas and questions that you might have. I'll pull everybody together right at the end just to talk about what our next steps are. And I'll open the rooms now.